My name is Mattie Leonard, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence and abuse. What happened when I was in my childhood, I was in middle school, and me and a friend was walking home from school. We was walking with these two other guys, and we came up to some empty construction building. She had the idea of having sex with one of the guys. Unfortunately, the guy would not have with her unless I had sex with his friend. And so she pulled me aside and asked me to have sex with him. Being a people pleaser, I didn't think twice about it. Everybody's doing it. What can it hurt? So I ended up going into this building with them, and we went into two separate rooms, and we had sex. After that, she was happy that she got to have sex with her friend. I had to deal with feeling bad about myself. Growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 12. I wanted people to like me. I dealt with that abandonment issues from my dad. My thought was people always leave. And so I became a people pleaser, wanting to have people around my life, around me. Also with my mother, she began to be an alcoholic and she drank a lot. And I had to learn to put on masks just to be able to deal with her so that she wouldn't get angry with me and be volatile with me. She got angry so fast and she would act out onto myself. I learned young that you try to make people happy so that they won't do anything to you. There was another incident where I was playing with the kids on my street and they invited me back to their clubhouse. I went to the clubhouse and they began to fondle me and touch on me and start doing things that I didn't feel comfortable with. I asked them to stop. They just laughed and kept doing what they were doing. And I was able to break free and get loose, and I ran all the way home. They were going to gang rape me. I was able to get out of that situation, but it left a sad sense of uncomfortability in my life, dealing with other people, other kids, and I didn't know how to handle that. I was dating this guy. He was in high school, and he was 2 grades higher than me. He wasn't home, and his brother invited me in. And we was having small talk, and he decided to show me around the house to see, just to see stuff. And when we got to his room, he pushed me into the room and pushed me on the bed and began to fondle me and try to take off my pants. I couldn't get him off of me, and he ended up raping me. When he was finished, I got dressed, and as I was walking out the door, the guy that I had went to see came through the door, and he looked at me with disgust. He thought that I had actually consented to having sex with his brother, but he didn't know the situation or the story that had happened. And I just ran out of the house being humiliated, not knowing how I could have stopped it. And I just dealt with that. I walked home and I just kept that secret to myself and never told anyone, never told my mother or anyone about this situation that had just happened. I was 14 when this happened. I had just started high school. It was hard for me to concentrate in school, to see the people in school that had violated me. It was very traumatic. I didn't do any sports or anything. I just went to school and came home. Well, after I graduated, I ended up getting married to this military guy when I was 17 years old. He was abusive, just have arguments with me for no reason. He would have extramarital affairs, and one day he had left the house for a long period of time and I couldn't reach him, and I just decided to go in my medicine cabinet and take a whole bunch of pills, and I tried to kill myself, and I laid there to die. And when he came home, he tried to get me up, and I was in such a state I couldn't hardly walk. Speech was slurred. He had to take me to the hospital, and he told me not to tell anybody at the hospital that I attempted suicide because it would get him in trouble with the military. And so I didn't. And I know the doctors knew something, but they didn't dare say anything about it. I just had to get my stomach pumped that was such a traumatic experience, seeing the blood and the mixed pills running through a tube out of my stomach. And I just laid there and cried. Just that he would pick fights with me for no reason. And I didn't know I could fight back. So I took the abuse. I never saw my parents fight. I thought he was the man of the house. He was controlling and he was jealous. I just didn't know that I could fight back or that I could leave. You know, for that matter, I had left my mother's house to be with him. I thought he was the only thing that I knew. I ended up getting pregnant and having his child. We got into a big altercation one night, and I ended up going to a shelter for battered women. But I ended up going back to him because I didn't know nothing else. He was physically abusive, start fights with me, slap me, and talk down to me and make me feel like I was less than. He made me feel like I was going crazy, like I was thinking about his extramarital affairs and that I had no proof of it. And so he made me feel like I was going crazy. It was a lot of emotional abuse as well as physical. Well, I finally left him for good. He was supposed to go to Korea and he never went. After 2 months of taking my baby to the hospital, the last time I went there, they told me that I couldn't be seen at the hospital. And I didn't know what was going on. And I went to this group called Waiting Spouses, and they investigated and found out that he went AWOL from the military. So he abandoned the military and he abandoned me and my child at the same time. I was devastated because I didn't know what to do. You know, at that time, you know, I had went to live with my mother just for that time period that he was going to be in Korea, and he never went. And he abandoned us. That's how I got a divorce, through abandonment. I didn't divorce him. He divorced me, in a sense of how he went AWOL from the military and he abandoned me and my child at the same time. So I ended up getting a lawyer and getting a divorce through abandonment because I didn't know where he was. I later got married to someone else that was in the military as well. And at that time, I was in the military. I was 23 when I got married to another man that was in the military. And by that time, I was in the military for 2 years. And he was very controlling. I felt like I was a trophy that he tried to get and just put it on the shelf after he got it. He would pretend to be nice to me when we were outside, but when we were behind closed doors, he was a different person. He would talk down to me and make me feel like I was less than. He wanted me to have another child by him, and I wouldn't. Our relationship got even worse. And then as I was going up the ranks and he wasn't, he became very jealous and competitive with me. That made our situation even worse. He would pick fights with me and we would get into altercation. One time I told him I wanted to leave, and he took all my clothes and threw them in the fireplace and told me, now you can leave. You're not leaving with any of your stuff. I ended up taking the lighter and hitting him in his head and took out a gash of his scalp with that lighter. And he called the police, and I fled the house because I didn't want to be arrested. He ended up also cheating on me, and he got someone else pregnant. We ended up getting a divorce because he found somebody else, which was a saving grace for me because I didn't have to deal with that abuse. He was telling me stuff that, like, how I got ahead in the military. I must be sleeping with somebody. I must be doing all these things to get ahead, and that I was a cheater. You know, he would just try to fight with me. And at that time, I didn't hold back. I fought with him as well. I knew that I had a voice and that I could stand my ground. And when I did that, it got worse. There was a time where he slammed me on the ground and I got a concussion. We also went to church. And that's what I had hoped for, that maybe church would change the way he was, but his controlling and his jealousy and his competitiveness made things worse. And, you know, he would hit me and we would fight, or I would hit him and we would fight. There was another time where I wanted to get out the car and he wouldn't stop the car, and I jumped out and he left me there. He didn't come back for me. I had to walk to my job to get assistance and to get help to get home. It was different situations like that was very volatile and very hard to deal with. I had came home one day. I had been at work and I stayed a little longer than he felt I should. And when I got home, he attacked me, held me in his arms and was shaking me like, "Where are you at? Where were you at? What were you doing?" And I tried to push him off of me, and he took me and slammed me to the ground. I ended up getting a concussion. Well, I found out I had a concussion when I went to the hospital. When I fell to the ground and I didn't get up right away, he backed off. It kind of shocked him because he was expecting me to get up and fight, and I didn't have it in me to fight. I ended up going to the hospital and determined that I had a concussion. I ended up getting orders to go to Korea, and when I went to Korea for a year, he stayed back, and he ended up having an affair and having another child. When I came back home, he had 2 suitcases waiting for me outside. He had a suitcase for me and a suitcase for my daughter. He had changed the locks to the house, and he had changed the code to the alarm. So when I went to the back door to get in, it was a sliding door, and I was able to use my key to get in. I couldn't turn off the alarm. And the police came and they said, "It appears he doesn't want you here. We suggest that you get some of your things and just leave." And I ended up going to a shelter for a week, and the military helped me to get a place to stay on post. We got a divorce after that. Being out of that relationship, I felt bad. I felt bad because I thought I had found a father for my daughter. With me growing up fatherless, I didn't want that for my child. It was hard to deal with. I was glad I was out of the abuse. He me a lot. I was glad to be out of that situation where I had to have with him, unwanting. After being married before, I wanted to have a successful marriage, and I wouldn't have left him. In hindsight looking, I wouldn't have left because I wanted a father for my child. My addiction story happened at the end of my military career. I injured my back and I got on, and from there I retired, but I had an addiction to drugs. There was one incident where I was trying to get I trusted a friend to get the drugs for me, and he said the only way he'll get it is if I would use the drugs at his house. And being an addict, by any means, I wanted to use. So I did that. I went to his house, and he had picked me up and brought me to his house, and we were smoking and drinking. When he gave me the drugs, I blacked out. And when I came to, he was behind me having sex with me. I asked him, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I thought you had overdosed." And I saw the water, the pail, and the washcloth beside him. And so I believed him, but because I was so addicted to, I wanted to have more of the, so I stayed. Even after being, it wasn't until the next day that when he took me home that reality set in that I had been raped, and I ended up going to the hospital, and they submitted me to the psych ward because I was suicidal again. Well, what happens next is that I recovered. I was in jail 4 times, got 2 DWIs, a felony possession charge. My life had took a turn for the worse. Eventually, after that last jail time, I decided to turn my life around. I didn't like the circumstances that I had placed myself in, and I wanted to change. And that's where my book, Building Me Back Brick by Brick, came about. I started writing when I was in jail and continued when I got out. And now I have a life of recovery. I did have a relapse at 18 months, and now I have 3 years of living a life without the use of. I was 41 when I started using, and when I got to the point where I was jailed for 3 times, the longest time I served in jail was 8 days. I ended up in solitary confinement, and one of the inmates that was in jail, she wrote short stories, and she would pass it to us, and we would add stuff that we wanted to hear in the story, and it was something to pass our time away while we was in jail. And while I was in jail, I thought about writing my own story, and I started journaling and taking notes about my condition in jail, how everything that I was dealing with, about my addiction, how I wanted to stop, I began to write. When I got out of jail, I continued to write. And that's when my book of Building Me Back Brick by Brick was born. And I talk about my addiction and how I got to a point of recovery. Now I'm 55 years old and I'm a published author. I still have my house. I've gotten a new car. Everything is going well in my life. I've written 2 books, Building Me Back Brick by Brick, about my struggle with addiction and how I got recovery, and Silent Cry, about my domestic violence and abuse. So I go around to different places and I share my book with other people. I go to rehabs and talk to the women there at the rehab facility about addiction and how to overcome, and that you can overcome. Just because you went through so many things in life, your past doesn't have to define you, that you can achieve anything that you set your mind to. And I tell them about my life now and how I live a productive life and how I'm an author and how life is going good with me. Me and my daughter are living in the same house now with my granddaughter. Life is going good. I'm an author of 2 books, Building Me Back Brick by Brick and Silent Cry. I would say don't stay. Things are not going to get better. It would only get worse. For those getting into a relationship, start recognizing those red flags, the controlling, the jealousy, the belittling, talking down. Recognize those signs and they're not going to get better for you. It's going to get worse. And it may turn into violence. Also may end in your death. And being in a depressed state, get the mental health that you need. Don't try to do it on your own. You may need medication. You may need group therapy. You may need counseling. Those things are okay. And just find your voice. Find who you are and establish yourself. Set boundaries. Know that you don't have to put up with any and everything. You are a person of value, that you can overcome life circumstances. Knowing that life circumstances do happen, we're not going to have a perfect life, but we can get through it. Things that we can look out for in relationships is how that person treats you. If they treat you good and then turn around and treat you bad, recognize that. Recognize that it may be a pattern, that if they treat you one way in front of people and treat you another way behind closed doors, that's a pattern. That's a sign that, that person, for whatever reason, whether they have been through some abuse from their childhood or their adulthood, they have issues that they need to work through. And you can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself. You can only put yourself in situations that you can control and that you can get through. Well, at the time, my daughter and my granddaughter were living in their own house. So I was feeling alone and like I didn't have any support, any help. She didn't understand my addiction because she had never been through it before. It was hard for me. I didn't have any support, and I looked to even the more. I had a pain management issue that was unresolved, and I didn't know how to deal with that pain. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk, and I couldn't work. And trying to manage my household without the financial resources was even more stressful for me. I wish that I had went to counseling a long time ago when I was in my youth, when I was going through the pattern of dealing with different domestic violence and domestic abuse issues, that if I had got those situations addressed earlier, maybe things wouldn't have played out the way they played in my later life. But so that's why I say it's very important to recognize what you're in, recognize your state, get the help you need, keep it as a secret, let somebody know what you're going through, and also try to find the support in that particular area, whether it's domestic violence and abuse, whether it's try to find the help in those areas. There are resources out there that will help you in those situations. and help you to not get into them again. We have to change who we are inside. We have to change our perspective on life, that we have a personality change is what is needed. We don't have to deal with anything that's going to harm. Dealing with the pain and depression and having suicidal ideations, it was very hard for me to get through it. I ended up going to counseling. Well, that was one of the terms of my probation, because I ended up on probation for 6 years. And I had to go to counseling. I had to go to anonymous meetings. And in the meetings, they told me about working a 12-step program. And in this 12-step program, you start to deal with, you do an inventory of yourself. You look at the defects and the assets that you have, and you start working to change those things. And so with the counseling, with the 12-step program, and being willing to make those changes in my life, I was able to get through. I was able to get to a healing process. And also writing those books, reliving those situations, allowed me to see a pattern that I kept finding myself in, and caused me to look at that and say, you know what, I don't want to be in those situations again. What can I do to avoid them? What was the pattern that led me into those situations? And realize that and avoid those situations. I'm not going to say it's going to take all those situations away, but it was a healing process for me. And I was able to get to a place now that I don't blame myself, that I don't have shame anymore. I talk about what I went through. And that is to help other people know that there are people like us that's out there that's been through so much in our lives, but we can be successful people. Some of the things that I had to unpack is that abandonment issue that I felt, being loved with conditions. I had to learn that love is not conditional. That if someone loves you or if someone cares about you, that you don't have to do anything for that. And I didn't have to look to please people. Now I have to please myself. I have to learn to set those boundaries. You know, I had to learn to love myself, accept myself where I was at, and not try to deviate from those feelings, but to address those feelings. I had fear of people. Fear that, people would leave me, or fear that people were going to hurt me. I always looked at people with a motive, like, what is your motive? Why do you want to be my friend? Why do you want to get to know me? And I still deal with that a little bit, but not as much as I used to, because I've learned to get good people in my life, and that outweighed the bad that I had dealt with. So now I know that I can be a caring and be empathetic. I had lost my will to be empathetic to other people, because I was like, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? Why are you telling me this? And I've learned to be more empathetic to people today. And be empathetic to myself. Know that my journey was just that, a journey, and I made it. I want to say that I'm actually writing a book about healing from trauma. I'm going to talk about all the trauma that I went through in my life and how to get through it, starting from my childhood. My dad leaving, dealing with the that she dealt with, and it wasn't diagnosed. Just dealing with the different abuse that I had to deal with, and the different struggle with addiction that I dealt with. I explain how you can heal from those traumas. It's like a backpack that you fill with rocks, and you have all these things. You have anger, you have resentment, you have trauma. And once you start taking that rock of resentment out, taking that rock of anger out, taking that rock of whatever trauma you're dealing with out, the backpack becomes lighter, and you're able to walk. You're able to hold your head up. You're able to run. You're able to do things that you wouldn't have done before. That's getting that trauma out of your life. And that's what I'm dealing with now.